The meticulously planned community of Eagle Ridge Estates, a sprawling tapestry of identical townhomes and manicured green spaces, prided itself on its pristine common areas, its rigidly uniform landscaping, and the tranquil, if somewhat suffocatingly enforced atmosphere cultivated by its ever-vigilant homeowners association. Within this highly structured environment of carefully curated order, the communal trash and recycling center, a fenced-off concrete pad featuring several large color-coded bins and a hulking heavy-duty industrial trash compactor, was expected to be an exemplar of cleanliness efficiency and quiet compliance. It was also on this deceptively bright Tuesday morning about to become the epicenter of a horrifying, almost unthinkable confrontation that would irrevocably shatter the neighborhood's placid, self-satisfied facade. Sergeant Ben Carter, a man who wore two distinct but increasingly overlapping professional hats, knew the Eagle Ridge trash compactor with an intimacy that bordered on the proprietary. By day, his official title was Supervisor within the city's Police Waste Management Division. This was a specialized, often misunderstood unit, responsible not only for overseeing municipal waste contracts and the rigorous safety protocols of its facilities, but also for investigating instances of illegal dumping, hazardous waste violations, and ensuring the secure, tamper-proof operation of city-owned heavy equipment like industrial compactors. His law enforcement background granted him inherent authority, and his deep technical knowledge of complex waste management systems provided him with a unique, often invaluable expertise. Off-duty, however, Ben was simply a resident of Eagle Ridge, a devoted husband, and an eagerly expectant father, fiercely, almost primally protective of his wife, Khloe. Khloe Carter was the warm, vibrant, incandescent heart of Ben's world. She was 7 months pregnant with their first child, a much-anticipated and already deeply loved daughter, and she navigated the often challenging world with an inspiring grace and an indomitable resilience from a specialized lightweight high-performance wheelchair. A reckless, intoxicated driver running a red light 3 years prior had caused the catastrophic accident that confined her to the chair, an event that had tested their bonds to their absolute limit, but had ultimately miraculously forged them stronger, deeper, and more unbreakably. Khloe, an accomplished and sought-after graphic designer who worked from her meticulously adapted home office, refused with a quiet, steely determination to let her disability define or diminish her. Her custom-fitted wheelchair, with its ergonomic supports, responsive hand-rim controls, and vibrant purple frame. A small act of joyful rebellion was her key to independence, allowing her to manage their household with efficiency, attend her prenatal appointments with excitement, and maintain an active, engaged life within their community. Ben often marveled at her unwavering strength, her infectious optimism, and her refusal to succumb to bitterness. Their life in Eagle Ridge for the past 2 years had been mostly peaceful, characterized by friendly, if somewhat superficial neighborly interactions and the quiet rhythms of suburban existence. There was, however, one significant, recurring, and increasingly venomous exception. Dorothy Grimshaw. Dorothy, a perpetually scowling, hawk-nosed woman in her late 60s, whose thin lips seemed permanently pursed in disapproval, served as the self-appointed hyper-vigilant watchdog of the HOA's Common Area Compliance and Aesthetic Standards Subcommittee. She seemed to derive a perverse, almost vampiric satisfaction from identifying fault-levying judgment and inflicting misery upon her neighbors for the most trivial of perceived infractions. Her own townhouse unit, which by some cruel twist of fate directly overlooked the communal trash center, was a veritable fortress of oppressive, sterile neatness. Its tiny concrete patio was devoid of any personal touches, its windows always immaculately, almost unnaturally clean, seemingly to provide her with an unobstructed panoramic view of any and all transgressions committed by the lesser, more disorderly residents of Eagle Ridge. From the moment the Carters had moved in their hopeful optimism, A stark contrast to Dorothy's ingrained cynicism, Dorothy had taken a particular obsessive and deeply unsettling dislike to Khloe, specifically to Khloe's pregnancy and her wheelchair. It was a dislike that transcended mere curmudgeonly grumbling and veered into something darker, more pathological. She had lodged numerous increasingly agitated complaints with the HOA about Khloe leaving her cumbersome mobility apparatus unattended and obstructing common thoroughfares when Khloe would briefly, and of necessity, transfer to their specially adapted car in their designated parking area. She had once loudly, publicly, and humiliatingly accosted Khloe for tracking unsightly, dirty wheel marks on the pristine sidewalk near the community mailboxes after a light rain shower. Ben, his voice quiet but laced with an unmistakable undercurrent of controlled fury, and police authority had intervened on that occasion, his steely gaze momentarily silencing Dorothy's tirade. But her resentment towards Khloe, far from abating, only seemed to fester to deepen her gaze, often lingering on Khloe's visibly pregnant form and her wheelchair with an expression of undisguised, chilling malice. Other neighbors had noticed it too. One, an elderly gentleman named Mr. Henderson, had quietly mentioned to Ben that he'd seen Dorothy watching Khloe with a look that could curdle milk, muttering about some people being a burden and the importance of a pure community. This disturbing undercurrent hinted at a truth Ben was only beginning to suspect. Dorothy Grimshaw was not merely a petty tyrant. She was a woman wrestling with profound, unacknowledged, and dangerous psychological demons. Unbeknownst to the community, Dorothy's own sister had spent years in a wheelchair after a debilitating illness, eventually passing away in a state institution. Dorothy had viewed her sister's dependence as a personal failing, a stain on the family, a clutter in her life. Khloe, vibrant, independent, and now visibly pregnant, represented everything Dorothy resented and feared, a life lived fully, despite perceived imperfection, a burden that refused to be hidden or ashamed. This deeply buried trauma, twisted by years of bitterness and isolation, was now being projected onto Khloe with terrifying intensity. Dorothy had even started a secret, meticulous ledger, a spiral-bound notebook filled with tiny, cramped handwriting, detailing every perceived slight, every rule violation, every impurity she observed in Eagle Ridge. The entries concerning Khloe Carter were becoming increasingly frequent, detailed, and alarmingly unhinged, filled with words like contamination, eradication, and necessary cleansing. On this particular sunny, deceptively calm Tuesday morning, Khloe had wheeled herself down the gently sloping paved path to the communal trash center to dispose of their household recycling. It was a routine chore, one she usually managed without issue, though the sheer size and industrial power of the trash compactor always made her slightly uneasy. She positioned her wheelchair with practiced care beside the large blue recycling bin, carefully sorted her items, plastics in one section, paper in another, and was just about to turn her chair back towards the path leading to her home, when Dorothy Grimshaw emerged wraith-like from her own unit. Dorothy carried a single small, impeccably tied white garbage bag, but her eyes, like chips of obsidian, were fixed immediately, unerringly on Khloe, with an expression of cold, profound disapproval. "Well, well. Khloe Carter." Dorothy began, her voice dripping with a familiar saccharine condescension that barely concealed the venom beneath. "Still managing to clutter up the common areas with that contraption of yours, I see. Some of us, those of us who value order and propriety, are trying to maintain a certain standard of tidiness and aesthetic harmony around here, you know." Khloe sighed inwardly, a familiar weariness settling over her. She refused to take the bait, refused to let Dorothy's cruelty penetrate her carefully constructed shield of calm. "Good morning, Mrs. Grimshaw. I'm just finishing up with my recycling. Have a nice day." "See that you do." Dorothy sniffed, pointedly, depositing her own small, insignificant bag into the gaping maw of the general waste bin, with an air of exaggerated, almost theatrical propriety. And try for once not to leave that cumbersome chair of yours blocking access for those of us who can actually walk and contribute meaningfully to this community. She then added her voice, dropping to a conspiratorial, almost gloating whisper, loud enough only for Khloe to hear. Some things just don't belong, dear. They spoil the perfection. They need to be cleansed. Khloe ignored the deliberate, chilling cruelty of the remark, her primary focus now on maneuvering her wheelchair safely away from the bins and the oppressive presence of Dorothy Grimshaw. As she began to turn one of her front caster wheels, usually so responsive, snagged momentarily, unexpectedly, on an uneven, almost invisible lip of concrete near the massive, silently humming industrial trash compactor. The machine, a hulking behemoth of steel and hydraulics, always made her slightly uneasy, with its sheer brutal size and its potential for unimaginable crushing power. To free the trapped wheel, Khloe had to lean forward, her pregnant belly pressing uncomfortably against her lap, momentarily taking her hands off her main wheel rims to jiggle the caster. It was in that brief, unguarded, utterly vulnerable moment that Dorothy Grimshaw, her face suddenly terrifyingly contorted with a shocking, almost feral rage, a mask of pure, unadulterated malice, acted with a speed and premeditation that was nothing short of demonic. Before Khloe could even register the shift in Dorothy's demeanor, before she could react or defend herself, Dorothy lunged forward with surprising, wiry strength. She grabbed the sturdy push handles at the back of Khloe's lightweight but incredibly strong custom wheelchair, and with a guttural snarl of effort began to forcibly, violently propel it, with Khloe still precariously, terrifyingly balanced within it, directly towards the open, waiting, hungry maw of the activated trash compactor. "You want to clutter things up, do you?" Dorothy shrieked, her voice, no longer condescending but raw, ragged, and filled with a terrifying, murderous fury. "Let's see how you like being compacted, you and your damned useless chair. Time to take out the real trash!" Khloe screamed, a sound of pure, primal, unadulterated terror, a sound ripped from the very depths of her soul. Instinctively, desperately, she threw her hands out, her fingers, scrabbling, clawing for purchase on the cold, smooth, unforgiving steel sides of the compactor chute. Her body lurched dangerously, her center of gravity shifting precariously, as Dorothy shoved the rear of the wheelchair hard, with brutal force, against the machine's unyielding frame. The compactor, already in its automated cycle from a previous residence deposit, was emitting a low, powerful, ominous hydraulic hum, its massive internal ram plate slowly, inexorably beginning its crushing, relentless descent within the darkened chamber. Khloe, 7 months pregnant, her heart exploding in her chest, clung desperately, with the last vestiges of her strength, to the slippery edges of the chute. Her knuckles were white, her arms straining her specialized chair wedged partly horrifyingly into the compactor's opening. The deafening, terrifying sound of the compactor's powerful mechanism, the groaning of hydraulics, the grinding of gears filled her ears, drowning out everything but her own ragged, panicked breathing, and the chilling sound of Dorothy's triumphant, insane cackling. Dorothy, her face a grotesque mask of triumphant, almost orgasmic malice, her eyes gleaming with a horrifying, unhinged satisfaction, reached past Khloe's struggling form and slammed her bony hand down hard with vicious intent on the main brightly lit start cycle button on the compactor's control panel. This, Khloe knew with a surge of icy despair, would ensure a fresh, full, and immediate crushing sequence would engage, overriding any previous cycle. "Time to take out the trash once and for all," Dorothy cackled again, stepping back a pace to better admire her handiwork, apparently utterly oblivious, or perhaps chillingly indifferent to the fact that she was in that moment attempting to commit what could only be described as a brutal, premeditated murder. Sergeant Ben Carter, as it happened by some extraordinary, perhaps divine coincidence, was already en route to Eagle Ridge Estates. He was not on a personal matter, not heading home for lunch, but in his official professional capacity, as the city's police waste management supervisor. The city had recently implemented a crucial software upgrade on all its municipally managed industrial compactors, an upgrade designed to enhance safety features and prevent unauthorized operation. Ben was meticulously conducting a routine series of on-site diagnostic checks, safety inspections, and software verifications throughout his assigned sectors. The Eagle Ridge HOA Compactor, known for its heavy usage and its somewhat temperamental control panel, was next on his detailed checklist. As he turned his unmarked city vehicle, a nondescript Ford sedan, into the main entrance of the sprawling complex, he heard it. A sound that instantly bypassed his professional detachment. A sound that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. A sound that pierced his heart like a shard of ice. A high-pitched, desperate, prolonged scream, a sound he knew with sickening, absolute certainty, belonged to Khloe, his Khloe. It was followed a split second later by a coarse, triumphant, almost inhuman cackle that he recognized with a surge of pure, cold dread as belonging to Dorothy Grimshaw. His police radio, which had been murmuring quietly with routine city dispatch calls, was momentarily completely forgotten. His heart leapt into his throat, a wild, terrified bird trapped in his chest. "Mom!" He slammed his foot down hard on the accelerator, the sedan's engine roaring in protest, gravel spraying from beneath the tires as he sped with reckless abandon towards the communal trash center. His mind a chaotic, nightmarish maelstrom of worst-case scenarios, each one more terrifying than the last. He skidded to a halt, tires screeching near the compactor enclosure just in time to witness the horrifying, almost unbelievable tableau. Khloe, his pregnant wife, his entire world clinging desperately, precariously to the cold, unforgiving edges of the compactor chute. Her wheelchair was partially grotesquely forced inside the machine's opening, its wheels spinning uselessly. And Dorothy Grimshaw, standing a few feet away, a small, malevolent figure watching with that same chillingly satisfied, predatory smirk he had seen on her face before, but this time magnified, distorted by an almost palpable aura of insanity. The deep, powerful, rhythmic groan of the compactor's hydraulic ram, already beginning its relentless compression cycle, was a sound Ben knew with terrifying intimacy. It was the sound of imminent, catastrophic, irreversible, crushing force. There was no time for questions, no time for confrontation, no time for anything but pure, unadulterated, life-saving action. Every professional instinct, every ounce of his specialized, hard-won knowledge of this precise machine, every fiber of his being as a husband, as an expectant father, as a protector, converged into a single, focused, desperate point of action. "Khloe," he roared his voice, a raw, primal sound of fury and fear. He was already out of his vehicle, sprinting with the speed and agility of a man half his age towards the compactor's emergency control panel, located on its side, partially obscured by a large recycling bin. He knew this particular model, a WMX 5000 industrial auger compactor, as intimately as he knew the lines on his own hand. He knew its complex schematics, its hidden kill switches, its multi-layered emergency override protocols. His fingers, guided by years of training and countless inspections, flew across the panel, instinctively bypassing the standard keyed lockout mechanism. He slammed his palm down hard on the deeply recessed emergency stop button, a bright red mushroom cap with a practiced, forceful jab. Then, with a grunt of effort, he yanked open the main power disconnect lever, a heavy, spring-loaded metal bar, with a decisive, satisfyingly metallic clang. The threatening, ominous hydraulic hum of the compactor died, instantly silenced, with a shuddering mechanical sigh of relief. The massive internal ram Ben knew had frozen in its descent mere inches from what would have been the absolute, utter destruction of Khloe's expensive, custom-built wheelchair, and terrifyingly, potentially Khloe herself, had she been unable to hold on, had her grip failed, had she fallen completely into the crushing chamber. For a long, stretched moment, there was an almost deafening, ringing silence, broken only by Khloe's ragged, terrified, hysterical sobs, and Ben's own harsh, rasping, adrenaline-fueled breathing. He rushed to Khloe's side, his hands astonishingly gentle, but incredibly firm, as he carefully, painstakingly extricated her from her perilous, nightmarish position, pulling her and the precariously wedged, damaged wheelchair back from the compactor's unforgiving steel-toothed jaws. She collapsed against him, trembling uncontrollably, burying her face in his chest, her small body racked with violent, convulsive shudders. "Ben! Oh, Ben! She tried to. She really tried to." Khloe couldn't finish the sentence, her voice choked with tears, terror, and disbelief. "I know, sweetheart, I know. You're safe now. I've got you. It's over. You're safe." Ben murmured, his voice thick with emotion, holding her tightly, protectively, his own body shaking with a volatile mixture of profound, overwhelming relief and a towering, ice-cold, murderous rage directed at the woman still standing nearby her expression. Now one of stunned, almost comical disbelief. He settled Khloe gently onto a nearby low retaining wall, ensuring she was steady, though her eyes were still wide with shock, her face streaked with tears and grime from the compactor chute. He took a deep, steadying breath before turning his full, formidable, and now terrifyingly calm attention to Dorothy Grimshaw. Dorothy's initial look of smug, insane triumph had morphed into one of stunned, open-mouthed disbelief at Ben's sudden, expert, and entirely unforeseen intervention. This was now rapidly giving way to a familiar, ingrained, belligerent arrogance as she desperately attempted to regain control of the narrative, to twist the horrifying reality of what she had just done. "Well, Sergeant Carter," she began, her voice attempting its usual haughty, dismissive tone, though it quavered slightly, a telltale sign of her dawning panic. "Fancy meeting you here on official business, I presume? Perhaps now you can finally do something about your wife's inappropriate and rather hazardous use of common facilities." She was clearly deliberately attempting to dispose of that oversized, unsightly chair improperly, and I, as a responsible member of this community, simply assisted the machine in its designated cycle. A civic duty, really. Ben stared at her, his expression unreadable, a mask of cold, professional detachment. His police training, deeply ingrained, was locking firmly into place, pushing down the raw, primal fury that threatened to consume him. This wasn't just another petty HOA dispute anymore. This wasn't just harassment. This was a crime scene. A very serious, potentially lethal crime scene. Dorothy Grimshaw. Ben said, his voice quiet, flat, devoid of any discernible inflection, but carrying the unmistakable, chilling weight of imminent, inescapable legal authority. "You are under arrest." Dorothy actually scoffed, a harsh, derisive sound. "Under arrest? Don't be utterly ridiculous, Sergeant. For what, pray tell? For upholding community sanitation standards, for preventing the wanton misuse of expensive HOA property. I think you'll find I'm the victim here, constantly being harassed and provoked by your disorderly, non-compliant wife and her clutter." "No, Dorothy," Ben stated, his voice still dangerously calm, as he took a pair of standard-issue police handcuffs from the case on his duty belt. "You are under arrest for attempted murder in the first degree, and for felony aggravated assault on a pregnant woman, a protected class, and for reckless endangerment causing imminent risk of death or serious bodily harm, and for malicious destruction of property. Specifically, essential medical mobility equipment valued in excess of $10,000. He recited the charges slowly, deliberately, each one landing like a hammer blow, systematically chipping away at Dorothy's crumbling facade of bluster and self-righteous delusion. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you by the court. Do you understand these rights as I have read them to you?" Dorothy's face, already pale, turned a sickly, mottled shade of gray. The carefully enunciated words, "attempted murder in the first degree," finally seemed to penetrate her thick armor of self-righteous, narcissistic delusion. The reality of her actions, the true horrifying gravity of what she had just done, began to crash down upon her. She began to sputter, to protest her innocence, to make wild, incoherent accusations against Khloe, to threaten lawsuits against Ben the City, the HOA, to name-drop influential acquaintances she claimed to know. But Ben Carter, with the timely assistance of the first uniformed patrol officer, now arriving on scene, lights flashing in response to Ben's earlier almost reflexive radio call for urgent backup, as he'd exited his vehicle, calmly, firmly, professionally handcuffed Dorothy Grimshaw. Her hands, which moments before had been attempting to shove a pregnant woman to her death, were now secured behind her back. Her reign of petty tyranny over Eagle Ridge Estates, and her brief, terrifying, insane escalation into potentially lethal violence, was definitively, irrevocably over. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of official police procedure, raw human emotion, and stunned disbelief from the growing crowd of onlookers. Ben ensured Khloe was thoroughly, gently examined by the paramedics, who arrived swiftly with the patrol unit. Physically, apart from severe shock, some minor abrasions and contusions on her arms and hands, from her desperate grip on the compactor chute, and a racing pulse, she and the baby appeared miraculously to be unharmed. But the emotional and psychological trauma was profound, a deep, invisible wound that would take a long, long time to heal. Ben then shifted fully seamlessly into his professional role, his personal feelings carefully, necessarily compartmentalized. He oversaw the meticulous securing of the crime scene around the now silent trash compactor. The damaged wheelchair, its high-tech, lightweight frame bent and twisted, one of its expensive, specialized wheels crushed beyond repair, its sensitive electronic controls shattered by Dorothy's initial violent shove against the unforgiving steel compactor frame even before the ram had fully engaged, was carefully extricated and tagged as critical evidence. It was a testament to Dorothy's vicious intent. The compactor itself, a potential instrument of death, was locked down, its internal mechanism and its current contents now part of a major felony investigation. Ben, using his specialized knowledge, ensured that the ram was mechanically secured to prevent any accidental movement, and that all power sources were triple-checked and disabled. Detailed witness statements were taken from a visibly shaken, tearful Khloe, and from a now sullen, belligerent, and entirely uncooperative Dorothy Grimshaw, who, upon fully realizing the true, inescapable gravity of her situation, had immediately, loudly, and repeatedly demanded a lawyer. Crucially, security camera footage from a nearby resident's newly installed driveway camera, though partially obscured by a large ornamental shrub, captured enough of Dorothy's aggressive actions, Khloe's desperate struggle, and Dorothy's subsequent slamming of the compactor's control button to further damningly corroborate Khloe's harrowing account. Another neighbor, Mr. Henderson, came forward, his face pale, to report Dorothy's earlier chilling comments about cleansing and purity, adding another layer to the evidence of her disturbed state of mind. Investigators later executed a search warrant on Dorothy Grimshaw's townhouse. What they found chilled them to the bone. Tucked away in a locked desk drawer was the spiral-bound ledger. Its pages were filled with her cramped, spidery handwriting, a meticulous, obsessive chronicle of every perceived slight and infraction in Eagle Ridge. The final dozen pages were dedicated almost exclusively to Khloe Carter. The entries detailed Khloe's movements, her flaunting of her pregnancy, her defiant use of the wheelchair. The language became increasingly violent and unhinged, culminating in a chilling final entry dated the previous evening. The clutter must be removed. The impurity must be purged. Tomorrow is the day of cleansing. The compactor is the solution. It will be neat. It will be final. This ledger transformed the case from a possible crime of passion to a clear, undeniable act of premeditated attempted murder fueled by a deeply disturbed obsessive pathology. News of Dorothy Grimshaw's arrest for attempted murder and the subsequent revelation of her hate-filled ledger ripped through Eagle Ridge Estates and the wider city like a shockwave, leaving a trail of disbelief, horror, revulsion, and in some quarters where Dorothy's petty cruelties and psychological instability had long been acutely felt and feared, a grim, profound sense of vindication. The HOA board convened an emergency closed-door session that very evening, the primary agenda item being immediate desperate damage control and legally distancing the association from Dorothy's monstrous, unthinkable actions. They unanimously voted to permanently ban her from all HOA properties and committees, a largely symbolic gesture. Given her incarceration, issued a profound, abject public apology to the Carter family and pledged their full, unreserved cooperation with the ongoing police investigation. The community's liability insurance provider, upon being formally notified of the incident and the truly horrific nature of the charges against a prominent HOA committee member, immediately put the HOA on notice of a likely catastrophic, potentially bankrupting premium increase, if not an outright cancellation of their policy, given the extreme demonstrable negligence and the horrifying malicious intent demonstrated by their representative. The legal journey for Dorothy Grimshaw was as expected, given the overwhelming evidence, severe and unforgiving. The district attorney's office, armed with the damning ledger, the eyewitness accounts, the security footage, Khloe's compelling testimony, and Ben's expert assessment of the compactor's lethal potential, and Dorothy's deliberate manipulation of its controls, pursued the charges with righteous vigor. Bail was denied, deemed an unacceptable risk given the calculated, premeditated nature of her crime and her clear, dangerous instability. She remained incarcerated, isolated, and deteriorating throughout the pretrial proceedings. Faced with the absolute certainty of a conviction for attempted murder in the first degree and a sentence that would undoubtedly see her spend the rest of her miserable natural life in prison, Dorothy Grimshaw, on the advice of her beleaguered, overwhelmed public defender, eventually brokenly accepted a plea bargain. She pleaded guilty to the still incredibly serious charges of felony aggravated assault with intent to commit murder and malicious destruction of essential medical equipment. At her sentencing, the courtroom packed with concerned Eagle Ridge residents and media, the judge, after listening intently to Khloe Carter's quietly devastating, profoundly moving victim impact statement, in which Khloe spoke not of hatred, but of the enduring terror, the loss of her sense of safety, and her fears for her unborn child, delivered a scathing, blistering condemnation of Dorothy's cruel, inexplicable, and deeply depraved actions. He spoke of the sanctity of life, the vulnerability of the disabled and pregnant, and the absolute betrayal of community trust. He sentenced Dorothy Grimshaw to the maximum allowable term under the plea agreement, a very significant lengthy period of incarceration in the state correctional facility for women, with no possibility of early parole for a substantial punitive portion of that sentence. He also ordered her to pay full restitution for Khloe's destroyed state-of-the-art wheelchair, all associated past and future medical and therapy costs for both Khloe and her child, and substantial punitive damages, which would undoubtedly consume any and all assets she possessed. Her meticulously neat, obsessively ordered home in Eagle Ridge Estates was eventually sold under court order to satisfy these considerable financial obligations. In the months that followed, Khloe Carter, with Ben's unwavering tender love and constant support, and with the surprising, humbling outpouring of genuine compassion, practical assistance, and heartfelt apologies from many of their Eagle Ridge neighbors, some of whom confessed with shame their regret at having tolerated Dorothy's escalating toxic behavior for so long, without intervention, began her slow, arduous, but determined journey of healing. A new state-of-the-art custom-fitted wheelchair, even more advanced than her last, was acquired, funded partly by the initial restitution payments and partly by a spontaneous, generous community fundraiser organized by newly invigorated, deeply remorseful HOA board members. Their daughter, a beautiful, healthy baby girl they named Hope, was born healthy and strong a few months later, a radiant beacon of light, joy, and resilience in the wake of such profound darkness. The Eagle Ridge HOA, humbled, chastened, and facing a complete overhaul of its leadership, and bylaws implemented mandatory sensitivity and de-escalation training for all board and committee members. They revised their complaint procedures to include robust safeguards against harassment and abuse of power and installed new, clearly marked, easily accessible emergency stop mechanisms on all community-owned heavy equipment, along with highly visible signage detailing the severe state and federal penalties for tampering or malicious misuse. The communal trash compactor area, once a mundane sight of routine household chores, became a quiet, constant, sobering reminder of the day. One resident's petty malice and deeply disturbed psyche escalated into terrifying, almost lethal violence. And it was a reminder of the day Sergeant Ben Carter, in his unique, crucial dual role as a fiercely protective husband and an exceptionally qualified law enforcement officer and technical expert, had been in exactly the right place, at exactly the right horrifying critical time, armed with exactly the right knowledge to avert an unthinkable, unimaginable tragedy. Dorothy Grimshaw, stripped of her home, her standing, her freedom, and her sanity, served as a stark, enduring, and cautionary lesson in the devastating, far-reaching consequences of unchecked arrogance, untreated mental illness, and the profound, catastrophic abuse of perceived power. The quiet, rhythmic hum of the new, demonstrably safer trash compactor was for the Carter family and their true caring neighbors the sound of justice, resilience, and a hard-won, deeply cherished, fragile peace.